Hello, hello, hello. It's not the Three Stooges, it's the Screenwriter's Journey, day 126. Kind of a long day ish compared to the last few. And what am I doing here? I got to tell you, I've mentioned it before several times, but it's a very weird phenomena to be looking at what you wrote about roughly 5 weeks ago, a little bit more, knowing what you've written in the meantime, knowing what I'm currently writing. In fact, I just stopped, not for the day probably, but stopped doing some writing during the holidays. I've been able to do a lot of writing, hopefully for better and not for worse. But as I was saying, it's weird to look back and see what you were working on and either love it or hate it or somewhere in the middle. Um, So once again, I'm starting from the top. I'm moving into this section where Holly is still, it's still present day, as in not present day. It's still back when she was in her, the story started in her mid 20s, whatever. And so now we've got Katina, who I just came up with a name because I used to have a friend. Well, she's still a friend, but we don't hang out in grade school named Katina, and I've always liked the name. So I just introduced her as someone kind of a peer, a little bit older, but basically a peer of Holly's that she could bounce things off of. Paul sort of has and still has this position to some extent, but I don't know. Obviously, I think women, just like men do, women talk better to women, and men probably would open up more to men. So that's what I'm going with for now. I don't know if that will change or not. Heaven forbid nothing else has changed, right? It's all stayed the same. And this all goes back to the conversation I've had with myself about how much do you outline? How much do you internalize and write in your head? How much do you figure out your characters in your story? How much do you write treatments? How much do you write this and that? And as is clear by now, the answer is not nearly enough, probably. So what I'm trying to get here, in addition to Katina being a peer, is that she can probably talk a little more directly to Holly, girl to girl, woman to woman, whatever you want to say. And originally I had her as, I mean, not a slut by any means, but someone who's dating. But now I've sort of toned that down and I've switched it to this, the swiping right, which for those kids these days is what they do on the dating apps, from what I understand. And so that is what is going on here. I don't know that this entirely works. I think the gist of the scene, it's getting across what I want to get across. As I've said, and I'm far from the first one, every scene has to have an agenda. It can't end the story or the characters where it started. Something's got to, for better or worse, sometimes characters take a step forward, sometimes they take a step backwards. The story should always take a step forward, of course. It would be hard to imagine a situation where the story actually moves backwards, unless it's like whatever that Christopher Nolan Memento or whoever wrote that, or maybe the Brad Pitt movie about the guy who got younger, The Incredible Mr. Limpet. No, I don't know what it is. I never saw it. Okay. So I'm bringing forward here some of the stuff that appeared later in the script, notably Holly's line about because men are looking for long-term relationships. In a past version, and maybe even in this version, she had the conversation with Lexi while they're driving up. And so this is sort of, it's not really taking the place of it. It's not supplanting it. It's complementing it, or maybe just adding to it. Also trying to slip in the name of the city, Muskogee. I sometimes put Muskego by mistake, but Muskogee, Oklahoma is a relatively small town in Oklahoma, but there is a U.S. Marshal field office or a branch or whatever you want to call it. One of like 93. Okay. But that scene is not ideal. And so now, the problem is, in retrospect, now she's talking to Paul. And so what do we have? We have talk, 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 which I'm not saying that subsequent versions of the script won't have a lot of talking during this first part. It would be interesting to know, but I would guess, other than like a James Bond movie, which begins with some action scene, or some other movies do too, Mission Impossible or something, just a set piece for the purpose, because that's what people expect. But it would be interesting to analyze like 100 scripts or 100 movies and find out if there is a disproportional, that doesn't sound right, disproportionate amount of dialogue in the first 10 pages, 12 pages compared to the rest of the script, because obviously that's where you get the setup. And needless to say, during the fun and games, during the finale, the third act, where that's, the chase or the fight or the whatever, I would say there's more likely to be less dialogue because things have been set up. Having said that, if you do like a courtroom drama like A Few Good Men or fill in the blank, and I think there's probably less of those now, but then you get into the courtroom, and of course that's literally all it is talking, and that's when you really have to raise your game as a writer, because your dialogue is literally carrying the action. But, it can do it really well. The Few Good Men, everyone remembers the classic scenes in the courtroom. Where was I? Yes, I'm interior U.S. Marshal's office. So Holly's talking to Paul, and they're kind of hashing out, and I'm hashing out for the audience why she took this temporary assignment, this detail, to do this work, because she's not in that WITSEC, she's not in sort of the higher profile, if you will, divisions right now, as you wouldn't expect her to be as a person who probably has been on the force, a couple years or so. Okay. Everything will be okay. She's better off in a foster home. So this, like I said, it's weird to be talking about something that is so far removed. Spoiler alert, I keep giving these, from the present day, but that's just sort of the way it is. So this isn't bad. I think it's improving, as I have said many times in these 126 days. It's not exactly true. I sometimes do feel like, especially in retrospect, that I read something and I say, wow, you did not make any progress today when you read it back. But generally, I hope I'm going in the right direction. And it really, as I write, I'm figuring out, yes, the story, but more importantly, the characters. And as weird as it sounds, and as many times as I've said it, even though they are your characters, until they start speaking for themselves, which is psychologically or whatever impossible, but I think you know what I mean, because you've experienced it if you've done even a modicum of writing, that until they start speaking for themselves and talking to each other and getting into situations, you really don't know the character. And, oh, don't look at that. Don't look at that. That's all secret stuff. So now I'm going back and I guess I'm looking at my notes to see something. And here I am. Sometimes I I write in the script and then I go back and change the outline, and sometimes vice versa, which is kind of funny when you think about it. So that is kind of what I've got there as theme stated. What is the price emotionally and professionally of caring too much? And it's funny when, at least when I sit down and I first have a story in mind, I rarely think of the theme, which is probably not great. Although they do say that if you write, here's a great theme of my screenplay, and then you start writing it, it generally doesn't turn out well. Although, or sometimes it's more of a what if, what if the Back to the Future one, what if a kid went back in time and met his parents while they were still dating? There's a million what ifs, which isn't the theme. I guess you would have to consider what is the theme of a movie like that. And you might say, using the name of the Huey Lewis and the new song, it's The Power of Love, because that kind of is what turned the tide. But the theme here is sort of TBA. I'm still working on it. And present day, while I'm recording this voiceover and writing new stuff, it's still being refined somewhat. But, I first pictured this as a very simple kind of action, suspense, kind of drama, not really mystery thriller kind of thing, without a whole lot of deep thematic elements. But I guess by its very nature, the more you write and the more you think about these things, the more you go over character, the more you just naturally start developing a theme. So now I have pretty much abandoned the script for now, and I'm trying to work out, not in the script, but just in the outline or whatever this is, what can happen now. Can I answer these questions that are in the Save the Cat Strikes Back book about the debate? Is there a valid argument? So I'm literally just trying to work through that, because if you can't answer these simple questions, some are less simple than others, but if you can't answer them, then obviously you've got issues. And in that sense, it's always better to work them out. It's faster to work them out here than it is to write a scene or a couple scenes or whatever and then realize they don't work. Unfortunately, the downside of that is it's a lot easier to write out a theme or to write out character feelings, character flaws, character whatever. And then you go, oh yeah, that'll work. And then you get to the script and you say, how am I going to get that across in a believable way without saying, I feel terribly sad today. I'm depressed because my father left us when I was 8 years old and I've held a grudge against him ever since. So in one sense, it's great to get all that out in your outline. In the other sense, sometimes you can get in too deep and you can dig yourself a hole that is hard to get out of when you're actually writing the script. That is not to say that a script has to be like really shallow and surface and can't explore those things. But I would say generally the more you try to do that, the more talkier it's going to be, I would say. Would that be a fair statement? Let me check with the experts. Yes, they agree. So now I'm going through this whole thing and the whole Save the Cat and trying to see if the story I'm working on aligns with what I believe is a very sound and solid structural way to put together a screenplay. And I'm not the only one, by the way. What I end up doing, as you see here, is sometimes asking a lot more questions. Even in answering the questions that he has in the book, I end up with a lot more questions. You saw me write KISS there, which of course is keep it simple, stupid. And that has kind of been my underlying hope throughout this process from day one. I think I probably mentioned that way back when, and I certainly haven't succeeded. When I think of some movies, I'm just thinking like Don't Breathe. In particular, I don't know why that one came to mind. I mean, such a simple premise, A Quiet Place. Hundreds, thousands of movies have super simple premises. Anyways, we will discuss that more tomorrow. Day 126, over and out. Thanks. Bye.